Welcome back. You're still watching Citizen Planet, and they want to have that conversation as we wait to see the start of the Africa Climate Summit. I have guests in studio that I want to introduce to you. These are Boaz Kezire, who is the head of policy and advocacy at AGRA. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you here.
Good to see you.
We have Emmanuel Yusuf, climate support officer at MSF East Africa.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Good to see you here.
Yeah.
We have Benjamin Barwa, Program Manager at Kenya Climate Innovation Center. Good morning.
Good morning.
Right, and let's just get straight into it by, first of all, you telling me what your contribution will be at the Climate Summit. If I may begin with you, Boaz.
Yeah, my name is Boaz Kezire. I work with AGRA. I lead the policy and advocacy as well as the food systems work. So this particular Climate Summit, we are bringing in the agriculture and food systems angle, just especially to bring in the understanding that climate change can actually affect food systems. At the same time, food system practices that can affect climate change. So that's what we'll be bringing into this summit.
Okay, food systems impact from the climate change.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, Emmanuel.
I'm Emmanuel Yusuf, the Climate Smart Support at MSF Eastern Africa. Mainly our work is trying to see how we can incorporate climate actions into our medical operations within the region and also within the country. And one of the things that we want to come out of this African Climate Summit with is trying to find partners whom we can partner with so that we can move forward together, because we cannot handle climate change in the sector of health just as one thing. Climate is a big thing. We need to really understand what's really happening to other industries that are affecting health mostly. So it's something that we are looking forward to, and also trying to find solutions in the aspect of water, because water is a big challenge within the region.
Okay, interesting. Benjamin?
Yeah, thank you for having me here. So from Kenya Climate Innovation Center, what we are looking first is to be able to showcase some of the innovative solutions that we've been able to support in the local ecosystem. So we are looking at how then we can be able to walk the talk in matters related to climate, but also above that, we are looking at partnerships. We are looking to showcase investment opportunities. And I believe at the end of the week, as a country, as a nation, as a continent, the whole world then will be able to understand that the climate change opportunity in Africa is worth investing in it. Yeah.
Tell me some of those innovations that you're talking about that would go to improve the situation as is.
Yeah, so I think when we look at the local context, there are a number of sectors in the climate space that we are actually, we have identified opportunities. When you look at the case of the water sector, water scarcity is something that we cannot ignore. Kenya clearly sits on the arid and semi-arid region. And even when you look at the northern area of Kenya, the eastern area of Kenya, and even right now, like in Nairobi, water is a major issue. So innovations around water, we have supported these innovations for over 10 years, and very interesting innovations. One of the key things I say is that we have some of the local solutions to the challenges that we are facing. But in addition to that, we also look at renewable energy. For example, KCIC has been in the forefront of supporting renewable energy solutions. Currently, as a nation, we are looking at 80% in terms of usage of renewable energy, of which when we look at solutions like solar, mini-grids, productive use of energy, we are at the forefront of the same. Waste management is also something that is key. In Nairobi, we're also facing a challenge to do with waste. But apart from also Nairobi, there's also a number of regions that are having those challenges. Most recently, I was in Kakuma, which then I was able to see that actually waste in Kakuma is also a big challenge. I think a number of times we just assume, yes, we are dealing with the humanitarian crisis, but also in terms of resources that are taken there, where does waste end up at the end of the day? And then lastly, we look at agribusiness, agriculture, and commercial forestry in terms of being able to address our carbon footprint. Yeah.
That's quite a wide scope, and you'll be getting to the specifics later on. But let me get back to you, Boaz, and because you're talking about the food systems, let's start it there, because for instance, here in Kenya, one of the biggest challenges and what has been a campaign issue has been the question of food, the access, the affordability, but also the nutritional value of that food. And in fact, the government has a program that is now going into the second season, if I'm not mistaken, about the subsidized fertilizer. What has climate change got to do with our food supplies, the safety of it, but also the initiatives that governments are coming up with to support production?
Yeah, thank you so much. You see, you have first to understand what food systems entails. Initially, I think the continent and most of the actors, we have paid more attention into the way food is produced, the way food is transported, the way food is consumed. We've not taken care of how food, the environment upon which is being produced. You know, the nature and the type of nutrition kind of food you require on the table. So what food systems brings in this space is not only to understand food production, food supply and consumption, but being careful of the environment upon which food is being produced. So the kind of work that we try to do now is really to raise the understanding that you can actually increase food production and productivity without disrupting the environment. And there are so many ways. You know, one of the big challenges that we have on the continent today is, and that we're beginning to realize, it used to be the challenge of the West, you know, where there is a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, both carbon dioxide, methane, and others. And those are coming from the way we actually practice production productivity, but also post-harvest loss management. So to your good points around what we're doing differently is basically to understand that you can increase production productivity without disrupting the environment. On the continent today, we have over 280 million people that go to bed without food. So the challenge now is to increase food production. But there is a risk that you can actually try to use a lot of fertilizer, for example. You can actually cut forests, degrade the wetlands in a pursuit to increase the food production. So what we're saying there is, as you use fertilizer without being very careful on how to disrupt the environment, you may actually achieve food production at the expense of the environment. And when climate change hits, both in terms of drought or in terms of El Nino, you know, too much rain is eroding household assets, then you begin to see that even your production productivity increases are not getting you to where you need to be. So I think that's where we need to really pay attention to what the leaders will be speaking this week here in Nairobi. What commitments are they making? You know, what kind of assurances are they giving the global world that you can actually respond to food security challenges on the continent without disrupting the environment and climate change? So we need to really pay attention around those particular areas.
You talk about cutting forests, but if you had to be specific to the case study that I've just mentioned about Kenya, and many years ago, farmers planted indigenous seeds. They used what was available in terms of manure, whether it's from livestock or whatever. But now that is changing. Even farmers that relied on those sort of farming methods are now moving to the commercial fertilizer, and it is a government policy to even acquire that subsidized fertilizer. What are the risks that you're not looking at, that you need to be aware of at a time that you can already see where the continent is heading?
I think what we have to realize is that traditionally, remember, when we, as you've just rightly said, you could actually find soils that are already fertile, because at that time, the amount of pressure that the population was exerting on those soils was not as big. The population has increased. And these soils have been over-cultivated. So inherently, they have lost the original genetic value or the original health of the soil, as we would call it. So they really need to be fertilized. Just like any human body system, anything needs to be enhanced. But that said, even the use of inorganic fertilizer, you know, manure and the rest, has been good enough for quite some time. But the soils have now been depleted. They require to be enhanced. And that's why innovations have come up. How do we begin to use synthetic fertilizer in a bid to increase soil productivity? The challenge that comes with is on the manner and the behavior, the way we use it. Most of our landscapes are either slopy, therefore you can just easily apply fertilizer, and when rains come, they wash all that down to the downstream, you know, interfering with the other parts of the ecosystem. The water levels will be challenged because of the kind of chemicals that would have gone there. You would have even compromised the way the soils themselves they are trying to target to fertilize. You compromise the way the fertility is coming up. So I think the policies that are deployed, including like increasing fertilizer, because as we've just rightly said, the reason why subsidies are used is on the assumption that farmers may not be able to access and afford the right inputs, both a hybrid seed variety and the right fertilizer, of which the combination will get you a better yield. So the assumption is that if you give a farmer for 1 or 2 seasons the amount of subsidy, they'll be able to know that actually a combination of fertilizer and the right seed, you'll get a better yield. And therefore, you graduate them out. The challenge is when you really continue supporting that particular farmer without graduating them out and use the resources for other kind of investments that are required in the agriculture sector. Because it's not only seed and fertilizer that are required. You need to invest in irrigation, you need to invest in extension, and all those require resources. But to the issue of climate change and how the practices can really continue to change, I think we have to really adopt policies that could really allow our soils not only to regenerate, and that's why we are talking about new methods and approaches of rehabilitating soils. You've heard of language like regenerative agriculture, ensuring that soils can be protected, because you can use fertilizer on the wrong soil, you will still not get the best maximum yield. So those are the kind of the efforts that we really try to cultivate. And I'm glad that this climate summit is actually not an African climate summit. I would actually argue that it's a global summit where Africa is going to showcase its challenges and models and approaches of responding to climate change without going to the mistakes that the global north have done in the past, where you increase production massively, but use a lot of fertilizer, there is a lot of emissions, the climate is disrupted, the ozone layer is disrupted, and you are not able to have the health environment that the way we want it.
Right. And Emmanuel, he talks about impact of these farming inputs on the soils, but also the water. Is it of concern that you have noted in terms of the health of the population? If not noted, is this something that we should be wary about in the future?
It's actually a worrying issue because the type of chemicals that are used to make fertilizers have an impact to the populations in terms of health. It's not so clear, I would say, there that if we use a certain type of fertilizer, it's going to affect us in this way, but it's going to end up in the river streams, and it's going to flow all the way to a lake somewhere, or even the ocean, where it's going to impact people through the food that comes out of the ocean or the sea. Mm-hmm. So the other thing also,
this is tested and proven.
It's proven.
Like what rate? Like you would say that the amount of food you're consuming is contaminated. Do you know the prevalence?
We don't actually know the prevalence. Maybe I try and find out, but I'm not so sure about it. But I know that the fertilizers that we use has got some effect to the human beings. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In a way, it affects the human health on how we react to things. These are things that actually come on gradually without us not even noticing. It's like air pollution, for instance. It's been there for years, and we are still not sure if it's really impacting us in the way that it is.
Is there a chance of walking back? Because, I mean, we need food. That's a fact.
Yeah.
What do we do?
Well, I think, as my colleague has said, we need more research to find out the best quality that we can use. But as we keep on going on and the chemicals keep on being used for different purposes, especially in our food and in the industry, it's something that is not really irreversible. Mm-hmm. So our bodies begin to adapt in a way, and we're supposed to live with it all the way.
Right.
Yeah.
And Benjamin, much of this fertilizer is imported. There has been attempts to put up factories to manufacture fertilizer in some countries, I think including Kenya. We've not been so lucky to do that. So that dependence, yet it's dependence on a product that we think might actually be harmful to some extent. Are there innovative solutions to this?
Yeah, interestingly, I'd say there's quite a number of innovative solutions. When we look at organic fertilizer, it's something that actually stands out here. I think we probably just need to push conversations to the extent that we are giving some of these solutions as much publicity as we could. Mm-hmm. For example, when you look at innovations that are using waste to be able to make fertilizer, that is something that is already existing locally. When we look at those that are using the black soldier fly to make fertilizer, that is something that is already there. When we look,
you said black what?
Black soldier fly. Mm-hmm. So that is through the insects and using waste. Because in fact that assists us to address a solution on waste, address the solution to do with the chemical fertilizer. When we look at other solutions to do even with rabbit urine and the likes. These are things that are there. What I think is that locally we need to first also have strong policies in terms of how then we promote the use of organic fertilizers, but also push that further in terms of incentives that are provided for these innovations. So for example, when we are looking at buying the fertilizers locally, the costs associated with importing, of course, then one, you might find in terms of importing, it might be cheaper. Then two, also in terms of being able to incentivize local innovators, so that even in terms of their cost of production, that is able to go on the lower side, so that there is strong collaboration between the government, between the private sector, to be able to support such locally led innovations. Yeah.
All right, but you're concerned about, so yes, we can do the organic fertilizer, but can we do that in a large scale?
Yes, we can do it in large scale. I think we need to agree on some facts. For example, when we look at the amount we produce of waste, even like right now when we walk outside in Nairobi, in our streets where we live, we have waste lying over. We need to ask ourselves at the end of the day, some of this food waste, this organic waste, where does it end up? Most of it ends up in landfills. And when it ends up in landfills, it ends up creating like the methane emissions, which are directly contributing to the climate change. But the proven solutions are there. What could we do to make the ecosystem more friendly? So it's more of like creating a friendly ecosystem. What personally I have been doing, and also through KCIC for the past 10 years, is support such like innovations. And we have to agree that this requires a level of investment. A level of investment in the sense that we cannot do it alone. We need a collaborative approach around it. So the many players who are there, it's just for us to see how to collaboratively work around it. Right. But from our honest opinion, we already have these solutions. It's just a matter of now scaling the innovations. And the aspect to do with investment is something that is very key. Yeah.
And Boaz, I remember sometime in 2016, I think it was October of that year, I had traveled to Japan and witnessed how farmers there, they're able to farm without using any chemical. They'll go to the forests, collect leaves, or was it whatever trees shed. I think they're trees and branches. And then there will be rice husks and they are put together, and over time, they're able to come up with some compost manure. It takes a bit of time, like close to a year. Then they have a way they even process, what do you call it? The alternative to spraying pesticides that are natural actually. But then again, when you look at such a farm, you look at the investment, it's what do you call it? This one that you have shields.
The greenhouse. Yes. Greenhouse, yeah.
The greenhouse. You look at the investment, it's quite an investment, because they're even able to install instruments that are able to check their temperature at whatever particular time, the humidity and what have you. How do you make that happen, even if it's gradually, for the farmers that we have in these African countries, if you're to focus on the East African region, how do you make that a possibility moving forward?
I think the way you've described it, and if you really take it a little bit a notch higher, you see, there is a lot of science that has to be involved there, the way you've described. And then the other thing you've mentioned is that you can start small scale, but also make sure that it's a large scale. And our friends in the West, actually, especially like in Vietnam, where we visited recently, they have been able to adopt some of those technologies. It's very correct that you can actually, and I want to agree with you, but also add in the sense that organic fertilizer is good, but it may not be sufficient enough based on the kind of the scale of the challenge that we have. The kind of biomass you require to use organic fertilizer to respond to the nature and the type of food production you need is so huge, and that biomass is not there. So the question now, therefore, is, do we resort to practices that are not actually right and begin to, use inorganic fertilizer in a way that cannot be really healthy? No. I think some of the policies that we have to adopt seriously is really to be able to see, and I think Africa is beginning to do this. You rightly mentioned that most of the countries on the continent now are beginning to invest in different fertilizer production. This is different from the kind of fertilizer we're importing, what we call blanket fertilizer use, a combination of potassium and others, and you just throw into the soils. what the research is beginning to show us, and I think really we're getting to that space, is understanding the nature and the type of soils that we are treating. So that's why soil testing becomes extremely important. Two, to be able to know the kind of fertilizer blend that these soils and a particular crop will require to optimize your fertilizer use. Now, going to the point that you've just raised, and I think we've seen some of these practices happening, large-scale rice production in Vietnam, where you are able to use optimized water, water that has been cross-fertilized, you blend like a fishery project or a poultry project, you are able to release that water, it's organically released into the rice fields, and you are able to increase production and productivity of the rice, having used the right seed of rice, then you get yields more than double to almost 10 kilograms per hectare. Then you are able to reduce the amount of synthetic fertilizer used. You are reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. So it's actually possible and practical. I think what Africa needs to do more is that those models exist, but they are isolated in some of the countries.
Okay.
We need to pick them up as good models and scale them up, increase production, reduce fertilizer use. Remember, people who are pushing for Africa to reduce fertilizer, synthetic fertilizer, currently Africa is using between 18 to 20 kilograms per hectare against the 2006 Abuja Declaration of 50 kilograms per hectare. So we haven't reached where we need to be doing it right. Although we need to make sure that the way we are applying fertilizer is done in a most efficient way. The global north, in the people who are pushing for us to reduce fertilizer, have been using over 300 kilograms per hectare. So at least the pressure from the global north is reduced from 250, 300 to 100, where Africa is struggling to increase from 18 kilograms per hectare to 20 or 50, based on what we committed ourselves to. But I think we have to be very careful in the way we use this fertilizer. It's not that we just want to do a lot of blanket use and therefore disrupt the environment and climate. So we are learning from the new models, new approaches, learn from the practices that have worked in the East, in Asia, Vietnam, Japan, the places as you mentioned. You really can be able to make best use of optimum fertilizer, both organic and inorganic.
Okay.
Regenerative practices, protect the environment, making sure that your soils are healthier. You increase to lime them, because if you apply lime, then you can actually use less of the kind of fertilizer we are talking about without disrupting the environment, while continuing to adopt the practices that I've just mentioned,
There's a figure you quoted there that we can increase rice production to, you said 10 kilograms per hectare?
Yeah.
10 kilograms per hectare?
10 metric tons per hectare.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Sorry about that.
All right. So I want us to transition, but before we do that, how do you, Benjamin, how do you make sure that this information is accessible to farmers? Despite what you're saying about innovation, the science is talking about, how do you make sure that it's available to farmers? They're not just farming based on what they learned maybe from watching their parents or grandparents.
Yeah, thank you. So what I would first maybe say is a number of times, and I think the conversation, of course, is centrally around climate change, we need to demystify it. Demystify it in the sense that it doesn't get to look like something that is complex, something that is complicated. A basic child, somebody even who is in junior school, should be able to understand climate change, should be able to tell you, like, actually there is climate change, and should actually be able to tell you, like, these are the solutions. So the dissemination of information is one of the key things. What maybe I'd emphasize is the aspect of, for us to be able to dominate and have these solutions, we have to connect, and connection is brought about by communication. So when we look at our current education infrastructure architecture in terms of our education modules, our curriculum, to what extent does it address the same? When we look at solutions that are out there in terms of churning out information, yes, we have information that is on print, we have information that is on our socials, but even the basic smallholder farmer who is out there in the rural area, how can they access this information? Locally, I've been able to see that innovators have been able to push the same, that apart from just information that is available on applications, we actually have this information being sent out through, you can access it through a USSD code. So that there needs to be more of that information, that awareness being driven out there. And even I think on the mainstream media, yes, this is something that personally I'd be able to say you should be able to drive this. And I think lately we have seen a number of shows that now are coming up in terms of creating this awareness, so that then it becomes a norm for people to understand, yes, there is a problem, yes, we have the solution, and to what extent can we be able to drive local-led solutions. Only with that then could we be able to take ownership of the problem and be innovative. Locally, there's the entrepreneurial and innovation culture is there, but has still a lot of room to improve. And then that support is there to be given. We have, like, if we look at all the entrepreneur support organizations that are out here, KCIC being one of them, we are actually able to support innovators, capacity build them, give them technical support, finance them. But we have to acknowledge we need more and more of such ecosystem players to be able to achieve this goal.
Okay, interesting. Let's take a short break. Once we come back, we'll continue with the conversation about the Africa Climate Summit. Boz says it should be a global climate summit. We'll see about that, but also the other concerns that we need to be thinking about at such a time. But also, what does climate change look like? What exactly is that? We'll try to break that down for you after the break. Stay tuned.